A man poses in front of the Eiffel Tower with his wife. A boat full of sunburned tourists gets flagged down by a Coast Guard cutter 15 miles off the Mexican coast. A traveler steps off a plane from Turkey, still smelling like sunscreen, and gets met by police before he clears the arrivals hall. None of these scenes look like the moment a criminal empire ends. They look like the most ordinary parts of a holiday, the parts nobody thinks to hide, the parts that never make it into anyone's threat assessment. That is exactly the point. The men in this story spent years building operations designed to survive raids, informants, and rival violence, some of them sophisticated enough to move tons of product across borders and evade law enforcement for years. What none of them fully accounted for was the specific vulnerability of simply relaxing somewhere unfamiliar, outside the territory where their money, their lawyers, and their protection actually meant something. Nobody flags a family holiday as a security risk. That is what makes vacation such an effective blind spot. It does not look like risk while it is happening, only afterward, once the arrest has already been made. Luis Manuel Picado Grijalba, shock. For years, Luis Manuel Picado Grijalba had a problem law enforcement simply could not solve through conventional means. He is a cartel figure who survived multiple assassination attempts on his own turf, only to be undone by a photograph his own wife posted for thousands of strangers to see. The 43-year-old, known on the street by the alias Shock, was accused of running a cocaine trafficking operation, shipping product out of Limon, Costa Rica, toward the United States, and investigators believed he was connected to a deadly 2022 shootout in the town of Matama that left 7 people dead, including a rival known as Raton. Grijalba himself reportedly survived that shootout by taking cover behind a cherry tree on his own property, and by some accounts had already survived 2 separate assassination attempts before that incident, a track record that painted him as a man for whom personal danger at home was simply an accepted cost of doing business. Despite the violence tied to his name, Costa Rica's constitution prohibits the extradition of its own citizens, and Grijalba, a naturalized Costa Rican of Nicaraguan descent, had spent years exploiting exactly that legal shield. Local prosecutors openly admitted they had no domestic charges against him strong enough to move forward, even as the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration built a case from abroad, issuing subpoenas he repeatedly declined to answer. Grijalba's answer to that legal protection was simple. He almost never left the country. Investigators had been quietly tracking him for months, waiting for the one circumstance that would let them act, the moment he stepped outside Costa Rican borders and into a jurisdiction with an extradition treaty. That moment came at the end of December when Grijalba made an uncharacteristic decision to join his wife, 32-year-old social media influencer Estefania McDonald Rodriguez, and their extended family on an extravagant European holiday to ring in the new year, purchasing roughly $20,000 worth of plane tickets for the trip. Rodriguez, who had around 21,000 followers on a since-deleted Instagram account, documented nearly every stop of the trip in real time, sunbathing on beaches, posing with parrots, sitting in front of Rome's Trevi Fountain, and finally standing with her husband beneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris. DEA agents, who had been monitoring the couple's movements since they departed from Juan Santamaria Airport in Costa Rica, used those geo-tagged, publicly posted images to track the family's route from Costa Rica to Rome and then on to London for New Year's celebrations. Rather than attempt an arrest in Costa Rica, where legal protections would have complicated everything, the DEA obtained an international warrant and coordinated directly with the UK's National Crime Agency. On December 29th, officers arrested Grijalba in the London Bridge area and remanded him into custody. Costa Rica's own director of judicial investigation later noted publicly that Grijalba, who normally traveled with extreme caution, had simply seemed too relaxed this time. He is currently fighting extradition to the United States, where prosecutors intend to pursue both a criminal sentence and the seizure of his assets. The arrest set off a wave of political controversy back home that revealed just how frustrated Costa Rican authorities themselves had become with their own inability to touch Grijalba. President Rodrigo Chavez Robles publicly questioned why domestic law enforcement had never managed to bring charges against a man local investigators openly linked to drug trafficking and a mass shooting, even as the country's own Attorney General, Carlo Diaz, acknowledged that his office simply did not have a criminal act it could formally attribute to Grijalba within Costa Rica's borders. That admission underscored the strange position Grijalba had occupied for years. Widely understood by law enforcement to be a major trafficker, protected almost entirely by the accident of his citizenship rather than any lack of evidence, a legal gap that had frustrated multiple administrations before his own arrest finally forced the issue into public view. It took his own wife's vacation photos, posted with no criminal intent whatsoever, to finally hand investigators the one thing years of domestic surveillance never could: a location outside the one country on earth where Grijalba was legally untouchable. Francisco Javier Arellano, Felix. By the mid-2000s, the Arellano-Felix cartel, built by a family of 7 brothers and 4 sisters out of Tijuana, had become one of the most feared trafficking organizations on the U.S.-Mexico border, the kind of organization that made a constitutional shield or a country's own reluctance to prosecute feel almost beside the point given the raw scale of the violence involved. It was responsible for elaborate smuggling tunnels running beneath the port of entry at Otay Mesa, and for a level of violence that had already claimed one brother in a 2002 police shootout and put another behind bars in Mexico. By 2006, leadership of the organization had fallen largely to Francisco Javier Arellano Felix, then 36 years old, who investigators believed had also taken on the role of the cartel's chief enforcer, allegedly ordering the beheading of 3 men, 2 of them police officers, earlier that same year. Officials at the time noted that of the family's original leadership, only Arellano Felix and one other brother, Eduardo, remained meaningfully active in the organization, with Eduardo considered by the DEA at the time to lack the capability to run the cartel on his own, leaving Francisco Javier as its de facto operational head, even as U.S. agencies closed in around him. Federal agents had spent 14 months preparing for exactly one opportunity. Intelligence indicating Arellano Felix planned to go deep sea fishing aboard a chartered sport fishing yacht called the Doc Holiday, departing from La Paz on Mexico's Baja California Peninsula. Fishing trips like this one were a regular indulgence for a man who, by most accounts, rarely strayed from carefully controlled environments on land. But international waters presented a jurisdictional opening that Mexican soil did not. On a Monday morning in August 2006, roughly 15 miles off the Baja coast, the crew of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Monsoon boarded the vessel and took Arellano Felix into custody, along with 8 adults and 3 juveniles who had joined the trip, including 2 men later identified as suspected cartel assassins. The operation was described by a top DEA official at the time as having taken the head off the snake. Deputy Attorney General Paul McNulty called it a huge blow to one of Mexico's 3 largest cartels, while acknowledging much work remained. The monsoon towed the Doc Holiday back to San Diego, where Arellano, Felix, and the others aboard were formally processed. At his arraignment, he appeared in a plain orange t-shirt, designer plaid shorts, and flip-flops, an outfit that looked more suited to the boat he had just been pulled off of than a federal courtroom. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, telling the court in a translated letter that he was personally remorseful and would undo his actions if he had the power to do so. His older brother and a senior cartel figure would later be extradited to the United States as well. But it was the fishing trip, a leisure activity Arellano Felix had almost certainly assumed was safe precisely because it took place away from land, that finally gave American authorities the jurisdiction they needed to end his run at the top of the organization. The scale of the manhunt that preceded the arrest is easy to overlook once the story is reduced to a single boat on a single morning. Federal agents had spent 14 months quietly preparing for exactly this scenario, building intelligence networks capable of tracking a man who, by every account, moved with extraordinary caution on land, surrounded by armed associates and insulated by a cartel infrastructure built over 2 decades. The fishing trip represented something close to the only reliable pattern in Arellano Felix's life, a recurring indulgence he was unwilling to give up, even as the pressure on his organization intensified, and one that, according to officials, he had taken often enough that agents were eventually able to predict it with confidence rather than simply hope for it. Manuel Arturo Villarreal Heredia, described as his right-hand man, was captured alongside him and later pleaded guilty to racketeering and conspiracy charges of his own. One more reminder that leisure activities involving trusted inner circles tend to expose not just the man at the top, but the entire structure around him. Within 2 years of the arrest, a former lieutenant named Teodoro Garcia Cimental would attempt his own violent power play inside the vacuum Arellano Felix left behind, plunging Tijuana into a wave of beheadings and daytime shootouts that outlasted the cartel's original founding family by nearly a decade. Shazad Maya. Shazad Maya did not run anything close to a cartel. He is proof that scale barely matters in these stories, since a street-level dealer running a modest operation out of Essex can be caught by the exact same instinct that brings down a cartel enforcer the moment he clears customs after one holiday too many. He ran what UK police described as the Frankie drug line, a street-level operation supplying crack cocaine and heroin across South End and Essex, using 10 different mobile phone numbers to advertise product and coordinating up to 5 street-level runners on any given day between February and June 2023. Investigators later estimated the line moved roughly 2.295 kilograms of Class A drugs during that window, worth an estimated 191,000 pounds. It was not an empire by international standards, and Maya himself was not a hardened cartel figure, but a repeat offender with prior convictions for drug dealing in both 2013 and 2020, the second of which had already put him behind bars for 3 years before he simply returned to the same line of work once released. But the Frankie line generated enough cash that Maya, with no legitimate source of income to explain it, funneled more than 30,000 pounds through personal and business accounts, including one registered under a fake car hire company, and used the money to fund an increasingly conspicuous lifestyle. Over a 4-month stretch, Maya took 4 separate holidays to Paris, to Menorca, to Amsterdam, and finally to Turkey, all while continuing to run the drug line remotely through the phones he carried with him. Unbeknownst to him, Essex police detectives had already identified him through more mundane investigative work, including CCTV footage, that had caught him buying a SIM card for one of the drug line phones at a shop just a 5-minute drive from his home. By the time Maya boarded a privately chartered boat in Turkey for the final stretch of his trip, sending a boastful photo of the scene to one of his runners back in the UK, detectives already had enough to move. He was arrested the moment he landed back in the country, stepping off his return flight from Turkey into Luton Airport on June 4, 2023, still carrying one of the drug line phones on him, apparently unaware that the same trip he had photographed and bragged about was the exact thing that had finally given detectives the confidence to move. Police raided his home the same day and seized further evidence. Following a trial at Basildon Crown Court, Maya was found guilty of being concerned in the supply of heroin and crack cocaine and of possessing criminal property, and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. A detective sergeant involved in the case later noted publicly that Maya had remained personally distanced from the harshest realities of the drugs he was profiting from, using the proceeds instead to fund a string of holidays that ultimately became part of the evidence used to convict him. What made Maya's case particularly instructive was that his travel itself was not what tipped off investigators. The CCTV footage that first placed him buying a SIM card near his home had already given detectives a foothold before he ever boarded a flight. What the holidays did was something subtler and, in the end, more damaging. They gave prosecutors a clean, undeniable financial narrative to present to a jury. A 30-year-old man with no legitimate employment, no other plausible source of income, and a criminal history that already included convictions in 2013 and 2020 was somehow taking 4 international trips in 4 months. That pattern of spending, reconstructed from bank statements tied to the fake car hire business, did as much to secure the conviction as any drug seizure did, because it answered the one question a jury always wants resolved: where did the money actually come from? Maya was not undone by getting caught with drugs on his person. He was undone by a paper trail of leisure that had no honest explanation behind it. Jordan Wulmer's downfall did not begin with a single dramatic arrest on vacation, the way some of the other cases in this story did. It began more mundanely with a routine traffic stop in Northampton in 2022, when police pulled over his BMW in Victoria Gardens and found 450 grams of cannabis, 83 grams of cocaine, and 7,000 pounds in cash inside, along with the co-defendant, Capper Berzinski, who would later plead guilty to his own role in the operation. What followed was a 4-year investigation by Northamptonshire Police's Serious and Organized Crime Team, one that leaned heavily on a source of evidence Wulmer himself had unwittingly provided: his own Instagram account. Rather than keep a low profile after his initial arrest, Wulmer continued posting extensively, filling his feed with images of himself driving a Lamborghini, posing in a Bentley, while wearing a 12,500-pound Rolex watch, and dining at Salt Bay's famous Nusser Et Steakhouse in London, where he reportedly racked up a bill of more than 1,200 pounds and paid in cash. Detectives used that public trail of luxury spending as part of the broader case connecting Wulmer to proceeds of crime, alongside more conventional forensic work. His fingerprints were matched to more than 14,000 pounds recovered from a property in Leicester in April 2023, and just days later to 500 grams of cocaine found in a storage unit in Rutland. In May 2024, simultaneous warrants executed at 2 addresses in Burton Latimer turned up another 500 grams of cocaine, more designer clothing, and 16,000 pounds in cash. By the time the case reached trial at Northampton Crown Court, investigators had documented a total of 57,465 pounds in cash, a kilogram of cocaine, 500 grams of cannabis, and 34,680 pounds worth of seized clothing connected to Wulmer across the full 2-year investigation, a haul that prosecutors laid out methodically alongside the social media evidence to build a complete financial picture of the operation. A jury unanimously found him guilty of supplying Class A and Class B drugs, and he was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in prison, with an additional sentence for breaching a suspended order and driving while disqualified running concurrently. A detective involved in the investigation put it plainly afterward. Wulmer had tried to live a life beyond his legal means and simply could not resist showing it off. And that inability to stay quiet about the lifestyle his drug profits were funding became one of the threads investigators pulled on for 4 straight years. Wulmer's case sits slightly apart from the others in this story, since he was never literally arrested stepping off a plane or a boat. But the underlying mechanism is identical, just stretched out over years rather than compressed into a single dramatic moment. Every dinner at Salt Bays, every photo behind the wheel of a Lamborghini, every image of a Rolex on his wrist was effectively a voluntary disclosure of unexplained wealth, posted publicly and left online for investigators to catalog at their leisure. Detectives did not need to plant surveillance or flip an informant to build the financial half of their case. They needed a phone with an internet connection and the patience to keep watching an Instagram account Wulmer refused to make private even after his first arrest in 2022. The lifestyle he could not resist broadcasting became, in effect, a running confession that accumulated for 2 more years after police already had his name, his fingerprints, and his first seizure on record. James Harding. James Harding built one of the more sophisticated operations in this story from a considerable distance, running a cocaine importation and distribution network across London and the southeast of England while living full-time in Dubai, a 5-star existence funded entirely by a criminal enterprise he described to associates as impregnable, and one that, on paper at least, looked no different from any other wealthy expatriate's life in the Emirate. Officially, Harding claimed to work as a sales executive dealing in luxury watches, an explanation that conveniently matched the Bugattis, Lamborghinis, and 5-star hotel stays that defined his life in the United Arab Emirates, and one prosecutors would later characterize in court as a thin cover story for a man who had never held anything resembling a legitimate salary. In reality, prosecutors say Harding's organization, working alongside his right-hand man Jay's Karuti, moved roughly 1,000 kilograms of cocaine into the UK across 50 separate importations, generating more than £5 million in profit in a single 10-week window during 2020 alone, part of a broader operation ultimately valued at over £100 million. The entire enterprise unraveled because of EncroChat, the encrypted communications platform Harding and Karuti believed was completely secure, using it to coordinate shipments under the handles The Tops King and Best Tops, a level of confidence in the platform's security that turned out to be catastrophically misplaced once European agencies found a way inside it. European law enforcement agencies cracked the platform and passed the intelligence to Britain's National Crime Agency, which handed it to the Metropolitan Police, sparking one of the largest EncroChat investigations in the force's history, and eventually producing more than 5,000 years of combined prison sentences for criminals who had trusted the platform. Among the messages recovered were detailed discussions between Harding and Karuti about hiring a hitman to murder a rival drug courier and steal his shipment, complete with plans for firearms and a getaway vehicle. By the time the Met was ready to move, Harding had continued living openly and visibly in Dubai, apparently confident that his physical distance from the UK offered real protection. That confidence broke down the moment he crossed into a jurisdiction where extradition was possible. Footage released by police shows the moment Harding was arrested at Geneva Airport in Switzerland on December 27, 2021, caught mid-transit rather than tucked safely inside the borders of the country where he had built his luxury life. He was extradited to the UK and, following a 7-week trial at the Old Bailey, was found guilty of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and conspiracy to commit murder. Karudi, who had fled to Turkey after his own home was searched, was tracked down and extradited back to Britain as well, ultimately admitting his role in the drug supply operation. Harding received a life sentence with a minimum term of 32 years. Karudi received a minimum of 26. The sentencing judge told Harding it was hard to comprehend the scale of what he had imported, and that without the accidental cracking of EncroChat, the true scope of his offending would likely never have come to light at all. What makes Harding's arrest particularly striking is how little separated him from safety at the moment officers took him into custody. Dubai has historically been reluctant to extradite wealthy foreign residents, and Harding had structured much of his life around exactly that reluctance, staying inside the Emirates' borders for extended stretches and only venturing out when travel felt necessary or perhaps simply routine. Geneva was not his final destination and not a city he was known to frequent for business. It was, by most accounts, a stop connected to ordinary travel rather than any specific criminal transaction, precisely the kind of low-stakes movement a man as careful as Harding might have assumed carried little risk. Investigators, armed with EncroChat intelligence that had already told them everything about his network's internal structure, simply needed to wait for him to cross into Swiss jurisdiction. The empire he had built from a 5-star apartment overlooking Dubai's skyline ended the moment he stepped off a connecting flight in a country he had no particular reason to fear: Ryan Wedding. Ryan Wedding's path into this story began not with a vacation, but with an Olympic Games. In 2002, he competed for Canada in the parallel giant slalom at the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics, finishing 24th, a modest athletic footnote that would later become one of the strangest details attached to any major trafficking case in recent memory, and one investigators and journalists alike would return to repeatedly as a shorthand for just how far his life had traveled from that snowy competitive slope. After a prior U.S. conviction for conspiracy to distribute cocaine sent him to prison in 2010, Wedding was deported back to Canada in 2011 and used the criminal contacts he had built during that sentence to construct something far larger, a cocaine trafficking operation moving an estimated 60 metric tons of product annually from Colombia through Mexico and Southern California into Canada, operating under the protection of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Wedding, who went by aliases including El Jefe, Public Enemy, and Giant, did not build a quiet operation. Investigators described him as a man of imposing physical presence who cultivated a life of open luxury even while functioning as a fugitive, surrounding himself with motorcycles, expensive watches, private aircraft, and a personal lawyer whose apparent job was to make legal problems disappear. He is accused of orchestrating multiple murders connected to his trafficking network, including placing a bounty of up to $5 million on a Canadian-born FBI informant who was later shot dead in Colombia, along with the killings of a federal witness and several other individuals tied to his organization. For more than a decade, American, Canadian, Colombian, and Dominican authorities worked to locate Wedding as he moved through Mexico under the Sinaloa cartel's protection, a level of cover that, for years, made the flashy lifestyle he maintained abroad functionally untouchable, and that turned what should have been an ordinary manhunt into one of the most complex multinational pursuits in recent narcotics enforcement history. He was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list in March, with the State Department eventually offering a $15 million reward for information leading to his capture, and investigators steadily closed in around him by working outward from his own network. His second-in-command, fellow Canadian Andrew Clark, was arrested in Mexico in an operation involving Interpol and the Mexican Navy, while associates, including a Toronto lawyer and a jeweler allegedly connected to his organization, were arrested in Canada. In January, after more than a year of coordinated international pressure closing the net around him, Wedding turned himself in at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City rather than risk being taken by force, and was flown to California to face charges including conspiracy to distribute cocaine, conspiracy to commit murder, witness tampering, and money laundering. FBI Director Kash Patel, announcing the arrest at a press conference, compared him directly to Pablo Escobar and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, calling him a modern-day version of both, a description that stood in stark contrast to the 24th place finisher who had once represented Canada on a ski slope. Wedding's case complicates the vacation pattern in an interesting way because, unlike the other 5 men in this story, he was not caught relaxing on a beach or stepping off a connecting flight. He was, in effect, living an extended vacation from consequence itself, protected for over a decade by cartel muscle rather than by any single country's legal quirks, a form of permanent leisure disguised as hiding, and arguably the most extreme version of the same overconfidence running through every case here. But the underlying dynamic that undid him was strikingly similar. The lifestyle Wedding maintained, the motorcycles, the aircraft, the visible wealth surrounding a man who was supposed to be hiding made him a magnet for exactly the kind of attention a genuinely cautious fugitive would have avoided. RCMP Commissioner Mike Duheme called the arrest a special occasion during the joint press conference announcing it, noting that no single country or agency could have combated an organization of this scale alone. 36 people connected to Wedding's network had been arrested by the time officials finally closed in on the man at the top, each arrest peeling back another layer of a lifestyle Wedding had never fully managed to hide, no matter how deep into Mexico's protection he had gone. Every trafficker in this story had built genuine protection at home. Grijalba had Costa Rica's constitutional shield against extraditing its own citizens. Arellano Felix had an entire cartel infrastructure and a country where his family's name carried real institutional weight. Harding had physical distance and a jurisdiction, Dubai, with limited appetite for extraditing wealthy foreign residents. Wedding had the literal protection of one of the world's most powerful cartels. None of that protection traveled with them the moment they stepped outside the specific geography where it applied. Vacation, by its nature, is designed to feel like a suspension of ordinary rules. It is the one context where people who spend their entire lives being careful choose deliberately to relax, to post a photo, to bring the family, to charter the boat, to fly somewhere unfamiliar without running the same threat calculations they would run at home. Investigators in nearly every case profiled here understood that psychological shift better than the traffickers themselves did, and built their operations specifically around waiting for it. The DEA did not need to breach Costa Rica's extradition laws to catch Grijalba. They needed him to buy a plane ticket. The Coast Guard did not need to storm a cartel compound to catch Arellano Felix. They needed him to go fishing. Essex police did not need an international manhunt for Maya. They needed him to come home. There is also a generational and technological thread running through these 6 cases that is easy to miss if they are read in isolation. Arellano Felix was caught in 2006 in an era when the only tool available to investigators was old-fashioned surveillance and patience, 14 months of quiet preparation for a single window of opportunity on open water. By the time Grijalba was arrested, nearly 2 decades later, the same basic principle, wait for the target to leave protected territory, required almost no active surveillance at all. His own wife did the work voluntarily, posting the couple's location to thousands of followers without any awareness that DEA analysts were watching. Wulmer's case shows a similar shift. The evidence that helped convict him was not gathered through wiretaps or informants, but through a public social media account he refused to lock down even after police already knew his name. The tools traffickers use to protect themselves, encrypted phones, offshore accounts, careful compartmentalization, have grown more sophisticated over the 2 decades separating these cases. The impulse to show off or simply to relax and stop thinking like a fugitive has not changed at all and has become, if anything, easier for investigators to exploit now that so much of that impulse gets broadcast voluntarily and publicly rather than needing to be uncovered through months of costly, resource-intensive fieldwork. What also connects these 6 men is how little any of them seem to weigh the specific risk of travel against the risk they had already learned to manage at home. Every one of them had, by the time of their arrest, spent years successfully avoiding the threats they understood best: rival violence, domestic law enforcement, the day-to-day danger of running an illegal enterprise. That accumulated confidence, the sense of having already survived the hardest part, appears to be exactly what made a beach in Menorca, a fishing trip off Baja, California, or a New Year's Eve in London feel safe by comparison. It rarely was, and in each case, the gap between how safe the moment felt and how exposed it actually was turned out to be the difference between an empire that survived for years and one that ended within days. What ties these 6 cases together, more than geography or scale, is a specific failure of imagination. Each man had spent years building elaborate defenses against the threats he expected: informants, rival cartels, undercover buys, wiretaps, while treating leisure travel as a reward for that vigilance rather than an extension of the same risk. The very same instinct that made these men successful traffickers, the ability to compartmentalize danger and control their environment at home, made them dangerously overconfident the moment they left it. A cherry tree could shield Grijalba from bullets in Limon, but it could not follow him to London Bridge. A cartel's reach could protect wedding across half of Mexico, but it meant nothing at the door of a U.S. embassy. In every one of these 6 stories, the empire survived years of pressure applied directly at home and then ended within days, or in Wulmer's slower case, within a few years of its architect deciding for once to relax.